Colonel to get up here, and then we're going to start the meeting. Before we start, though, I am going to ask if we've got anybody that would like some translation assistance. We've got several team members here that are very fluent in Spanish, so I'm going to start by going to the back of the room, and you go ahead.
Mi nombre es Luis Benítez, yo jefe de ingenieros estructurales de la ciudad. Aquí tenemos con nosotros a Carlos y a Cristina. Si tienen alguna pregunta, por favor, díganos.
Okay, very, very good. So, if you would like any assistance, if you just want to raise your hand, one of the three can definitely come on over and help you out to get through our presentation. Tonight's order, we're going to actually start with some opening remarks, and then go through the main content, our slide presentation, and then the most important part, we're going to be talking about our actual NEPA or our formal process, and I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So, how are we looking for the Colonel? About here? Okay, very, very good. Excellent. All right. So I'll let the Colonel get seated, and while he's doing that, I'd like to have Alderwoman Garza please come up to the front and make an opening statement for the group.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out this evening. Thank you to the Army Corps for coming and letting us know what's going on. I'm grateful that all you guys are concerned enough to come to find out what's happening. In my wildest dreams, I'd rather have the room packed, right? But it is what it is. I just want to thank you for being here and taking an active concern in your neighborhood. So this is the Army Corps meeting, so I'm going to hand it over to them.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right. Well, with that said, at our front table are two main persons here for making remarks, our sponsors. First, seated next to me is Colonel Reisinger. Colonel is the Chicago District Engineer. And then next to him, Dan Burke is the Deputy Commissioner with the Chicago Department of Transportation. So with that said, I'd like to open the floor for some opening remarks from both of those folks.
Good evening. I'm Dan Burke with the Chicago Department of Transportation. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and just thank you all, as the Alderman alluded to, thank you all for coming out. I'd like to just compliment Colonel Reisinger and the Army Corps for their efforts in putting this all together this evening. They've been at the City of Chicago and the Department of Transportation as a lead for the city, our local sponsor on this project. We're here tonight to hear about the tentatively selected plan. We're all going to be pleased with it, and again, just thank you all for coming, and we're here to listen.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Apologize, I'm coming in just a little bit late. So I'm Colonel Reisinger, the commander of the Chicago District. Been the commander there for about 2 years, and I really want to thank you all for coming out to listen to us first off, but then really to give us your voice and your views on this, because this really is a point in time where we need to hear from the public in as much detail as possible so we can account for those interests as we go forward in this. So we are early in the process, so we'll explain all that. So, but first and foremost, I want to thank the Alderwoman. Thank you, ma'am, for hosting us here. We know this is you're our host, and so we thank you for letting us be out here and having this meeting and being able to engage with the public. It's been really important through this whole process, and we really appreciate that. One thing we're extremely proud of is since 1984, we've operated a facility out at Calumet Harbor that has allowed us to remove about 1.6 million cubic yards of contaminated sediment from our waterways, both in the channel and out in the harbor. And the results that we've seen from that, and being able to store that material in a safe, confined way that cannot impact the ecosystem is extremely important to us. One of the benefits of that, in fact, that you hear tonight, is over time the harbor material has become clean enough that we can now identify beneficial use for that material other than needing to just store it in a facility. And that has opened the window to different opportunities that we may not have identified a year ago when we were first out here scoping some alternatives, and so we're talking about that. So we've got a long ways to go, but we're very proud of what the process, the partnership and the work with the port and the city we've been able to accomplish over many, many years to continue to try to make an improvement, to improve the ecosystem and protect the environment from that contaminated sediment. As we go through this process, this is a very, very long process. There are many tough choices involved in this. These are really hard engineering challenges. There are many dynamics, many aspects that we have to consider to try to develop the best possible plan, best possible recommendation that we can come up with from a science, engineering, and economics perspective. And so we hope we can present that in real clarity to you tonight. I think the team has done a great job trying to lay out this briefing and how we came to the conclusions that we've come to at this point and the recommendation that we have tentatively selected for the tentatively selected plan. So once again, thank you to everybody, thank you for my team, and thank you to the city and everybody else for joining us. Thanks.
Okay, very good, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about logistics for this room. So for our own safety and situational awareness, keep in mind we've got an exit in the very back of the room and 2 exits on the side. Either will take you to the street, should we need to. Facilities, if you need to use a restroom or get a drink, there's a drinking fountain and restrooms are just out the door and around the corner from where our sign-in table was, so they can direct you to that as well. We're going to try to make sure that everybody can hear what we're talking about using these microphones and speakers. So during the meeting, if you would like to make a comment or a statement, we've got a podium up front and we'll ask that you come up to that so that we can make sure that everybody has that equal opportunity to hear what you have to say for us, okay? So here's how we're going to work the meeting tonight. We've got a slide presentation that's going to last about 30-35 minutes to give you an update on all the technical data that has been put together and put into this thing that we're going to call an EIS, and you're going to hear more about that. That EIS is what really truly brings us here tonight. So the little white piece of paper that was in the hallway is the real important nugget to take home. Whether you fill it out tonight and leave it here with us, whether you come to the podium and speak it to us in a formal comment or statement, or if you take an opportunity to work with it, type it up and either mail it in with snail mail or using email, all those options are at your availability. The only thing we'd ask is that our official comment period closes on June the 16th, and that is an important hard stop date at this time for any comments to be considered, okay? You'll hear more about why we want to make sure we get your comments tonight, but this is really the essence of why we're here. We're going to tell you about what we've done, and then we want to find out what it is that you're concerned about, what you'd like to make sure that we leave here with, okay? After the presentation, I'm going to come back up here. We're going to talk about how we're going to do the comments, but like I said, the comments are going to be taken from here. If you've asked to make a statement or a comment, I've already got a list started. If you're not on the list and would like to, you can at any time excuse yourself and go to the table outside and get on that list. Once your name is on the list, we will call you up in the order in which you put your name on the list. We'll ask for those comments or statements that you have. A couple of points for clarification. Number one, if you have any questions that you'd like to have answered during the presentation, we'd ask that you hold those until after we've finished with the comment session. And then while you're making comments, second point, we are going to be taking any comments or statements you have for face value, meaning that we won't have dialogue or interaction with you. And that's kind of the intent of a comment period, is we want to make sure that you have that uninterrupted opportunity to explain to us what it is that you're concerned about. Should you develop questions from that, or if you have questions, those won't be answered as part of the comment period. You would then have to come up later during the questions and answer session to ask those singularly, okay? So we want to make sure that we understand that when the comment period is open, that will be a comment taken for its face value and face value only, and no questions will be answered out of that, okay? It's real important that we keep anything that either goes on this, comes from the podium that's recorded, or gets mailed in as a comment for our EIS, because that's what our team really has to go on as they're trying to consider everything that we hear during this open period before we actually make it a final product, okay? So with that said, I'll look at my list here, but I think I've got my pieces I'd like. Noting too that the scoping process here, or the EIS process started on May the 3rd, and then that continues on until June the 16th at this time. So we've got a 45-day window, and we're early enough into that that we've got plenty of time to take any and all comments that you have for us. All right. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to our project manager, and he's going to give you the rundown of the kind of the synopsis of the EIS itself.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Padilla. I'm the project manager with the Corps of Engineers. I'm going to try to read these slides without using my glasses. You know, I'm getting old. It's practically my bedtime. I'm gonna do the best I can here. So this, what you're seeing up here on the screen is the Calumet Harbor and the Calumet River, and that's what this is all about. And you can see in the foreground there is the actual facility that we have right now that's been has been being operated since 1984. And you can see other parts of the neighborhood and the area. Why are we here tonight? Because of NEPA. We really want to, this is the process that ensures that the government considers all the impacts of a project that we may do, impacts to the environment, the human environment, to help us to make decisions. Public involvement is a big part of this. We really need your help, and in fact, you've already influenced, the public has already influenced this project quite a bit from your input in the past. We've made changes, and changes for the better that we believe. It's critical for you to help us with this by providing impact. Part of NEPA is to be transparent and make sure that we do everything where people can see what we're doing, and we want to be able to document what our decisions and our decision-making process. So that's what this is all about. So the agenda for tonight for this presentation is to look at the study, where have we gone with this study, the background of the study, what are the conditions that we are expecting, both existing right now and in the future. How did we formulate the plans? We came up with several different plans that we evaluated. How did we evaluate those plans and select the plan? And then again, the biggest part here for tonight, opportunities to provide input. So we have the authority given to us by Congress, really for navigation in this area, in the Chicago waterways. One thing about this, we have the authority to do operations when it comes to these bodies of water. We also have the authority to study. If we need a facility to help us to do that job, we can study it. But one thing I wanted you to notice about this slide, look at the authorities. Go back to 1899. The Corps has been involved for over a century in Chicago, in the development of Chicago. And we've always been proud to be a part of this and what made this city great. So we have the authority to look at this, and Congress gave us that authority and asked us to do things long, long ago, and we've been doing it ever since. Our non-federal sponsor, as you know, we introduced today Mr. Dan Burke, and he represents the City of Chicago Department of Transportation. They're our partner in this project. This is a map of the Chicago area waterway system. Basically seven bodies of water that's delineated here, and Chicago River, Chicago Harbor, South Branch of the Chicago River, the Sanitary and Ship Canal, the Cal-Sag Channel, also Calumet River and Calumet Harbor. Now, of these bodies of water, we're really interested in the bottom three, the ones that are color-coded there, the Cal-Sag Channel, the Calumet River, and the Calumet Harbor. And I'll tell you more about that, but those are the ones we're really interested in. So why do we need to dredge? This is really all about our dredging operations. Why do we need to dredge? It's because the bodies of water here are dynamic. Sediment moves around, there's currents, there's wave action, there's sediment that comes in off the land into the water. And what it does is that the sediment that moves around, it shoals, and it causes problems where boats can't get across. So shallow draft barges and towboats could be obstructed, and also deep draft vessels. And deep draft vessels especially, sometimes they can't make it through when they're fully loaded, and they would have to do what's called light loading, which is, it's just not a good way to go. It's not economical. And so that's a concern that we have. Why is it a concern? Why do we care? Because of the benefits of dredging, the benefits of that navigation, the benefits of the boats going in and out. It's a unique connection. Why is Chicago such a great city? It's the third largest city in America. It's a world-class city, and it's basically because it's the nexus between the Mississippi and the Great Lakes. That's really, if you study the history, that's really why this city grew and grew and grew. There's many other reasons as well, but that's really the origin of all this. We have a unique connection. Chicago is the second busiest port in the Great Lakes. Calumet Harbor and River, 7.5 million tons of goods and commerce, things on those boats per year. Cal-Sag Channel, 4.8 million tons annually. Shipping activities, they contribute to Chicago's economy. You've got 1,700 jobs that are supported by this industry. You have $250 million in industry. So that's why it's important. That's why Congress wants us to continue our mission when it comes to the navigation here. So how much dredging are we talking about? We know a lot about the dredging. We've been doing it at least in the way we've been doing it right now since 1984. And we're talking about 1 million cubic yards. Calumet Harbor, 500,000 cubic yards, and by the way, this is over a 20-year period. Calumet River, 500,000 cubic yards, and then the Calsag Channel, a much lesser amount, 30,000 cubic yards. On an annual basis, we're talking about 50,000 cubic yards, half from the harbor and half from the river. Pretty easy to remember, it's really half and half. And that small amount for the Calsag, it's really, we're looking ahead, we're planning ahead. We know that there are certain situations where you would have to dredge that Calsag channel. There's no current plans for dredging, and in fact, it hasn't been dredged since the 70s. But we're looking ahead to plan for the potential to have to dredge the Calsag channel. So we know how much we need to dredge. So what do we do with what do we do with the dredge material? It really depends on the quality of the material. That's what it really comes down to. If it's very clean material that's dredged and it's sandy, you can imagine there's some places in the country in the Waterway lakes where they just dispose of that material right in the lake. So in other words, you dredge from the lake and then you take it somewhere where it won't cause problems or it won't shoal in and you let it go there. And also you can use it for the beach, potential for beach nourishment. But again, that's when it's very clean and sandy material. In this case, in the case of that we're talking about tonight, we can still use it. We can take clean fine and clay or silt material and use it beneficially. And what I mean beneficially is you can use it for fill. You can use it for potential habitat, wetlands, and things like that. The Calumet Harbor sediment is actually a good example of that. The material that's in the harbor is clean, fine clay or silt, and so we can use it beneficially. Excuse me. If the material contains, is polluted or dirty, then we have to think of other management techniques. And one thing you could do potentially is just private management. In other words, send it to a commercial landfill. You could treat it, do some sort of a treatment of the material potentially. And then you could do confined disposal, which is what we've been doing with that material since 1984 with the current facility called the Chicago Confined Disposal Facility. And there's a photo of it there on the right-hand side. And then there's some things here. The open water placement, we talked about it in the beneficial use. But again, if it contains pollution, you have to think of other management techniques. So here are some of those management measures. The measures that you could employ when you're trying to manage the dredge material. Whenever we do a study, we always consider doing nothing, the no action plan. That's just something we do as part of our process. So we looked at that, not doing anything. We looked at open water placement, as I mentioned to you. We've considered that. The material is not suitable, at least at this time, for open water placement. The harbor material, over the years, we've noticed, has been cleaning up over time, and there may be a time in the future when it's clean enough for open water disposal. We monitor whatever we're dredging, we monitor it, we sample it, and we know, we find out what's in the material. So we keep an eye on how clean the material is. And there may come a time over the next, however long that it may be clean enough, and then we'll start to look at potentially open water placement. Beneficial use, as I mentioned, we consider that, and that's actually, beneficial use is something that we really took a hard look at, really based on the last public meetings and things. We took a hard look at beneficial use, and we learned some things about it that really helped us to look at a new plan. And so again, that's ongoing. It's going to be part of our plan. Source reduction. We looked at source reduction. In fact, we did a study. The Corps of Engineers has several labs around the country, and we employed a lab in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to look into, where is the source of these materials that we have to dredge? Where is it coming from? And we found the report is available, and there's a lot of information in there. What it really comes down to, though, is a lot of sediment is combined sewer overflow. You know that Chicago has combined sewers, and so sometimes they overflow when it rains quite a bit, and some of the sediment comes from that. But remember that MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, they just completed 2 reservoirs. The Corps of Engineers just built the McCourt Reservoir for MWRD, and MWRD finished the Thornton Reservoir recently. So that CSO, sediments from CSO, dramatically, will be reduced dramatically. And you're gonna start to see the river clean up because of those two reservoirs. It's too early yet, but you're gonna see it clean up slowly. And so sediment reduction is gonna happen from that. Other types of sediment reduction really comes down to, best management practices and things like that. And it really isn't the Corps' number one, mission. It's more of a local thing. And so we considered that, but it isn't really our big plan. We're gonna just reduce the sources and therefore we won't need a dredge. That's just not it's not gonna work well enough for that. We also looked at minimizing the dredging requirements. So if we don't have to dredge as much, then we won't have as much material to have to manage. That's ongoing. That's something that we do now. We only dredge, we do surveys and things about what's happening on the bottom of the lake and the areas that need to be kept open for shipping. And we see that we only dredge the areas that we know that need to be dredged. In addition, the authorities that were given to us by Congress, their dimensions and things, keep this channel open this wide, how many yards or feet wide. And we just basically dredge what we really need to make sure that the ships go through. So we're already doing that, minimizing the dredging requirements, and we have been doing that for quite a while. There's other things that private management, again, we talked about that. Really that kind of means landfill, and we looked at that and we found it to be not feasible. And I can tell you the reasons why we say that is, one is cost. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but we have to look at cost. It's basically about twice as expensive to haul this stuff to a landfill. But there's other factors here, and the biggest one is that you need a facility anyway. In other words, you can't just take this stuff, dredge it, and send it to a landfill. It has to be dried first. They only accept material with a certain water content. And so you need a facility anyway. We have to find a facility to do that drying. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It's expensive, and you have to have a facility. You have to build something anyway. So we find it to not be feasible. The next thing that we looked at was sediment treatment and remediation. And again, we found that not to be feasible. I think at the last round of public meetings, there was a lot of questions. Isn't there something that you could do to just treat the material so when you're done, it's clean and you can just, you dispose of it that way, it would be clean, and instead of having to confine it. And you'd think in 2019 there would be a technology that would work, that would be kind of a silver bullet to solve this problem. But we looked into this quite in-depthly, and there's really not a sediment treatment method that really works for us. Part of the problem is that number one, when you treat that sediment, it has byproducts of treatment, and so you may take and clean the material, but you end up with air pollution. A lot of the byproducts are airborne contaminants and that sort of thing. So that causes problems. It's something that it isn't a very good solution. It causes problems for the workers. There's all kinds of situations. There's all kinds of aspects of the sediment treatment and remediation that are just problematic. And so we found it to not be feasible. Oh, one other thing that I forgot to mention is that there are lots of different types of treatments, but none that we found that really deals with mass quantities. And so that's one of the big problems too, is that the mass quantity, being able to deal with mass quantity, sediment treatment just had shortcomings. So what's left here is confined disposal, and that's again one that we considered. We've used it for many, many years, so that stayed on the list. Bottom line, only the feasible management measures are being considered in detail in our report. And so I just wanted to make sure you understood that. The rest of these, we talked about them, but we go into much more detail with these other management measures. So I talked about beneficial use of dredge material. Calumet Harbor, as I mentioned, it's suitable for beneficial use. The Corps policy, as you can imagine, we're a nationwide agency, and we're water resource management. We do lots of dredging, and our policy is that we use dredge material and we put it to beneficial use as much as we can. And that's something that we really zeroed in on quite a bit here for this plan. The Corps and the City of Chicago are working together to plan out how we can beneficially use. And the good news is that we in our looking into this, we really see a continuing demand in the area for beneficial use. People want fill, they want material. There's lots of uses for it, and that really helped us to focus on what's a good plan to use this. And beneficial use, it's beneficial. Confined disposal, this is another one of our main measures here, and again, the Calumet River and the CalSag channel material is not suitable for that beneficial use. So we talked about all those other measures that we found to be not feasible, and some other measures that we're already doing, but the bottom line, we still have to do confined disposal. And we see it as the only viable and safe management measure for the contaminated sediment from these two bodies of water. And that's based on effectiveness, comparison of effectiveness, the scale, environmental concerns, and cost. So continuing on about looking at a site for confined disposal, because basically we're down to that point. We need to find, we know we can beneficially use the clean stuff, but we need to find a place to confine disposal to stuff that's dirty. And we had public outreach in the last go-around, and there was lots of good suggestions, and we listened, the team listened to what you had to say. Some of the things that happened from the public outreach, people brought up the Calumet master planning effort, and the Corps of Engineers wrote a letter and helped, hopefully we contributed to the successful grant that was obtained for the Calumet master planning, and so that's going on. That's a good thing. We reevaluated measures as we talked about those measures. We really started looking in-depthly at some of these other things to really make sure that we understood what is really the situation. We looked at additional sites. We looked at the beneficial use. We looked more into landfill, so we really knew what it all entailed. We looked at treatment alternatives. We also, a big thing that came out of the, when we were looking at sites for the confined disposal and from the public outreach, we decided to conduct an EIS instead of an EIS, an environmental impact statement, as opposed to an environmental assessment. And we did that basically because there was such concern that the citizens who were very concerned about the plan that we had come up with at that point. And an EIS, it makes sense to do an EIS. In fact, that's one of the drivers to whether you do an EIS or an EA is public concern. And so we decided to do an EIS. And what does that really mean? Well, an EIS is just, it's a more in-depth study. We look at things more in-depthly. For example, we do cost estimates and impacts analysis for all the alternatives that we're looking at, the final array of alternatives, I mean. We look at all of those in-depthly, whereas with an environmental assessment, you really only do that to the alternative you've selected. So we go into that more in-depthly. Another thing is that there's more public involvement. The public involvement period is longer than an EA for an EIS. And also the approval authority of the document for EIS is higher than an environmental assessment. And so, there is a significant difference between an EIS and EA, and we're doing that EIS because you basically asked us to. So continuing on with the confined disposal site selection, there's more than 60 sites that were identified in this planning effort, all through this region that you can see on the map. In 2015, there were 60 plus sites. In addition, we added additional sites since 2015 and the last go around for our study here. And the criteria that we use, to select a site are shown here. One of the main ones was size. We needed to be able to find a site that was big enough to handle. We're talking about 1 million plus cubic yards. We wanted to have a site that was big enough for that. We had to look at a site. We wanted to avoid natural resources. We wanted to avoid quality habit. A good example of that was Parks 576 is something that we were looking at, and we took off of the array of final alternatives because we knew there's wetlands and there's some habitat there that it just doesn't make sense to build our facility there. Current use, we don't want to go and try to build a facility on some land that doesn't make sense. That maybe there's some current use that's better, higher value use. We prefer to use underutilized land. We looked at environmental conditions. That's one thing the Corps has to do. We have to look at environmental conditions. We had to avoid we could even get started. And those are things that were a concern to us because we are on somewhat of a timetable. If we for some reason takes a long time to figure out this plan and get building it, if it takes a long time, then dredging could not occur because the other facility is full. And, we would just potentially be in a situation where the boats couldn't get through anymore. And so when we know there's a likely response action when it comes to CERCLA and contaminated materials and things like that, we try to avoid that site. Operability, we wanted to make sure that the site made sense from an operations standpoint. We've been operating the facility since 1984. We know a lot about what the ins and outs of that are, and so we wanted to make sure that whatever we picked operability was good. We looked at waterway access. We're dredging in the water, and we wanted to make sure that we had efficient handling and transportation, and so that was a factor is waterway access. We also were looking at upland sites. For one thing, to try to dispose of this in the lake obviously wouldn't work, and we mentioned that earlier. So an upland site also allows us to beneficially use material. We would actually, when we dredge the harbor material, it's clean enough to where we could use that to develop that site and to build components of the facility. And I'll show you components of the facility in a few minutes. So there was 5 sites that appeared to meet all of the above criteria. These are the final array of alternatives in addition to no action. You can see on the map they're going from north to south, the vertical expansion of the existing facility. In other words, where we are today, where we have our project, we would engineer it so we could build it higher. Former KCBX North Terminal, former Wisconsin Steel site, the 116th Street in Burley, and the former LTD site. Those are the final array of alternatives. And again, with an EIS, we looked at all of these alternatives with detailed, we did designs, we did cost estimates, and we did environmental analysis and impacts analysis so that we could identify what we refer to as our tentatively selected plan. So what we've selected is tentative at this time. Here's some information on the, we did an economic evaluation of those alternative plans. And you can see the alternatives across the top there, LTV, Wisconsin Steel, KCBX, 116th and Burley vertical expansion are shown at the top of the table. And then on the rows of the table show the average annual benefits, the average annual cost, the total first cost. And when I say total first cost, it's a little bit of a misnomer. What it means is the cost of the facility for construction, but also for the dredging cost and the cost to close. The dredging cost for 20 years, and also the cost for closing the site when it's all done. And so that's why it looks to be fairly expensive, because it's at 20 years of dredging operation as well. So what really comes out when you look at this table, they're very, very similar. The cost and the benefits, and even the BCR means benefit cost ratio, the benefits and versus the cost. 2.1 means that the benefits are 2 times as greater than the cost of the facility. They're all very similar, and in some ways it makes sense because really we're trying to build a facility that will hold the material that we're looking for. So the facility, the design of it is fairly straightforward. And then all the sites are fairly close, close together and are similar. And so the costs really aren't that much different. And knowing that, I mean, even look at some of those cost estimates, 4 out of those, the cost estimates are within 2%. And so even the margin of error, we say they're equal. What this does, when things are so close, though, what it does is you need to start looking at other things besides cost. And I think people probably would like us to do that. You can't just think about cost. You need to look at other factors as well. And we did that. We looked at additional criteria, and because when it comes to cost, these look very equivalent.
Can I just ask one question? 90 million?
Yes, ma'am.
So those are federal dollars?
So the part of it is, so the cost of the construction is cost shared between the city and the Corps of Engineers, but the dredging is a federal cost for the 20 years.
I'm sorry to interrupt, I apologize, but this is a lot of information. Dan, where does this come, what budget line does it come out of the city? See that?
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of the administration, it is not budgeted yet. There's federal laws that require the local sponsor contribution. We will follow those federal laws. And when that cost is finalized, it will be a budget item.
We should pass something to have the cost fix our bridges, saying.
Seriously.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, and just, the cost of the 90 million is 20 years of dredging,
Oh,
plus the cost of the facility, and that's what, so it's not, that's not the cost share for the city's only cost sharing the construction of the facility.
thank you for clarifying.
So just so
Sorry
you
about
know,
that.
that's
Yeah,
not, 90 million is a huge number, but it's our life cycle for the facility number, not the construction cost.
Thank you, Suzanne.
It's much smaller.
Thank you.
Okay, so, and again, picking up where I left off, it really comes down to that we're looking at other things now besides cost, because the cost is not a differentiator on these alternatives. So what we did was a trade-off analysis. At this point, we're relaying to you that vertical expansion is our tentatively selected plan. Vertical expansion of the existing facility, and what that, we see it as less risk. When you're not considering cost anymore, it's not a differentiator, you're looking at other things. One thing, it's far away from homes. It addresses a lot of the concerns that, during the public reviews that we had the last time, it addresses a lot of the concerns. It's less real estate risks, basically because it's a site that we're currently using. That real estate doesn't have a lot of monetary value. It's publicly owned. And if we build a facility on that site, it doesn't change the future use. After we're done with the dredging, with the plan that we have, it'll contain all the material that's possible for that site. We can't go any higher, and so we would turn that over to the local sponsor and the park district, and so the future use will not change. There's lower existing contamination risks. It's the same as the current use. We've been operating it safely since 1984. And when I say we've operated it safely, we can show you that. We do monitoring. We have permits from the state. We have to make sure we know what's going on. We're dredging material. It's dirty. We have to confine it, and so we have to follow a lot of rules. We monitor. We do sediment sampling. We know what was buried in there, and so we have a really good track record. And in fact, we have downloaded or uploaded to our website all of the information,
We're in the process.
we're in the process of uploading all the information so that you can see it, all of the sampling we've done. And so we can say it's been operated safely. One thing also that I think is interesting is that the material is very silty, it's fine grained. I don't know if anybody has clay in their backyard. There's a lot of Chicago blue clay out there, I know. If you have clay in your backyard, water doesn't move through it. I mean, it causes a lot of problems for people that want water to move through their lawn and stuff. But the soil, when you place it in there, it sinks to the bottom, the water goes to the top. We treat the water according to our permits, and we have a very, very good safety record for the existing facility. And so, again, the tentatively selected plan is the vertical expansion alternative. So, we talked about economic analysis and we talked about a few other things, but I wanted to just kind of circle back to that NEPA analysis. What did we look at when we looked at the impacts of building this facility? We looked at natural resources, the geology and the topography, the hydrology and hydraulics, water quality, air quality. We looked at contamination, contaminated materials. We looked at social and cultural resources, environmental justice. We looked at historical structures, tribal resources, recreation, noise, public health and safety. These are all things that we looked at in our study, and you can read about that in our draft study report that's available on our website. We looked at biological resources, flora and fauna, threatened and endangered species, threatened and endangered species critical habitat. We looked at wetlands, floodplains, high-quality habitat. When we talked about these different alternatives, these are the things we looked at. We also looked at, again, the economic resources, and we talked quite a bit in depth about that. So as far as the tentatively selected plan being the vertical expansion, This is kind of the conceptual design. What we would do is, right now, the site, that we saw the photo of the site, it's basically where we would go in and build, we take that dredged material that's clean, the beneficial use, we would build what we refer to as berms, basically containment berms on the site. And those containment berms, here's where I can't see from the glasses. You have certain things in the design of that. There's another slide I'll show you. But then we would fill in between those berms in 2 lifts, in about 11-foot lifts. So we would build and fill for a period of time. And then when that was filled, we would build a second set of berms and then fill in between there. And then eventually it would end up being roughly 25 feet high. And we would then close the site. We would use that beneficial material and topsoil and things like that to close the site. And so we're using the site beneficially. And we would have some restrictions on the future use to protect the cap. You couldn't go in there and build a building on top of it that had a big foundation or something. We have to protect the cap. But the restrictions are fairly modest. It can still be used as open lands or park space. Here's a more in-depth drawing of vertical expansion. And so what we're talking about is towards the north part of this would be a couple areas that we would use to dry material. We would dry the contaminated material from the river and potentially calcite channel in one spot and keep it segregated from the material that's clean from the river. And those areas, again, would be used to handle the material and dry it out, because we need to dry the material as well to handle it, to put it inside those berms. The middle portion would be those 2 layers of berms that I mentioned to you with material placed inside. And then to the south is dewatering. The material is wet. Even if we dry it and place it in there, it's still wet. And so, again, the soil, it weighs more than the water. It sinks to the bottom and the water comes to the top. And we deal with that water. We treat it and according to our permits and then release it. And so that part to the south, it is still that for water handling. And so there's some details here about the design. We're talking, there's geotextile. It was posted on the 3rd of May. Public and agency comments, public comments from you all and from agencies and that sort of thing are due on the 16th of June. We are considering extending.
Yeah, I think we've agreed to extend for up to 60 days.
We've agreed to extend for 60 days this time.
Not extend 60 days, but go extend from 45 to 60 days public comment period. We were asked to allow that extra 15 days, and we can approve that.
So we see the importance of input, and so we're giving more time to the public. Our agency decision milestone, actually, because of that extension, will probably change a little bit later. But what happens at an agency decision milestone is, again, we go to our higher headquarters and we say, we've talked to the public, we've done a peer review, done these things, we're still on the right track. Do you agree? And if they agree, then we will start looking into more detailed design, doing a design that we can get a decent cost estimate and other things that we can then put in the report for the public. And so that agency decision milestone is our next big milestone, and that's in July, but potentially into August now. After that detailed design that we talked about and cost estimated, we look to transmitting that draft report again to our higher headquarters for their approval. And then we're looking potentially to get them to approve by spring of next year, April of 2020. One of the milestones for an EIS is a record of decision that basically completes the EIS. And that really is to be determined basically because it's outside of the court's control. It shouldn't be too much after the April timeframe. It'll be sometime maybe May or June of 2020, at least as we kind of project the schedule. Here is the implementation schedule. In other words, if we got the plan approved, what would we do? If we got it, and actually this is a tentative schedule. One thing about the government, as we all know, is that it's really dependent on funding. We might not get the funding. We could get funding sooner than we have anticipated on this schedule, and this whole thing could happen sooner. And so this is just a tentatively approved schedule, basically to show you what is the overall timeline. It can move to the right, it can move to the left on this time scale. But in 2020, if we got this dredge material management plan approved, then we would start pre-construction engineering and design. We would do even more detailed design than what I talked about a minute ago for the study itself. We would do things like plans and specs, tell the contractor how to build it. And so we would do that for 2 years, potentially shorter. We would start to prepare the site. There's things that need to be done. There's drainage and things that has to be constructed. We would start to in 2024. We would start to dredge and dry stockpile that clean material so we could use it beneficially. And then that same year is when a 2-year gap in the river dredging would occur. And so a 2-year gap is not a problem. It's happened before, and so we're able to manage that. We've got experience on what to do. And then we would start to build the berms in 2025 with the operational facility to begin in 2026. And again, this is kind of a tentative schedule. It could move sooner, it could be later if we don't get the funding that we need. 3 years of construction, as you can see. Again, the biggest part of tonight and the biggest part of your contribution is to tell us what you think. Did we cover all of the aspects? I went through that big list of things that we looked at under NEPA, that all those aspects from different categories. We looked at all those things, but we may have missed something. Remember the last time that there was public input, we changed our plan. We listened to what you said, and we changed our plan. And so we want to hear from you. The report is available today. It was been available for a couple weeks at the website that's shown here. We have the feedback today. A comment session we'll talk in a few minutes. And then written comments are available here by mail or by email. And with that, I might have gone over a little bit. Okay, so I think we're okay. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin. And Kevin's going to kind of lead us through the comment period. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mike. Say, it's a little warm in here. If you would like some water, they did bring in some water in the back corner of the room here. If you would like a bottle of water, just raise your hand, and we'll gladly get you a bottle. So don't be shy. There we go. There's a hand here. A couple of hands in the middle if you want to raise it down the center. Just want to make sure that we don't get anybody too hot for a long meeting. So. Okay, so we've got a couple things we need to take care of. So we've got through our first part. You've heard all about what we've got going on, what this real report means to us, and now we need to hear from you. So this opportunity is for you, anyone that's here, to come on up, and we've got our panel at the front, and then all of our technical people that have worked on this are in the room here as well. We want to hear from you. So I've got a list of a couple people that have already signed in to give us their public statement. So we're going to start. The first person is Peggy Salazar, and then the second person is Jim Kinney. So when you're ready, I'll call you up to the microphone. What we've got is a short little timer slide to kind of keep you in order. Obviously, if we've only got a couple of statements, it's not going to be as critical, but we do want to respect everyone's time. And we'd ask that you limit your statement to 2 minutes and give us the most important pieces of that statement in the 2 minutes that you have allowed. And then if you have more that you'd like to submit, you're always free to submit as much material as you'd like by the end of the comment period. So you can leave anything with us tonight, or you can actually send it all in at one time towards the end as well. Keep in mind, if you do not want to speak to us, your comments are still equally as valid. Using this comment form, you can fill it out tonight if you'd like, and at the signing table, we've got a metal drop box. You can fold it up and put it right into that. And then if you'd like to take it with you, there's instructions on the bottom of the sheet on how you could mail that in, or if you want to type it up electronically or scan it electronically, you can email that in as well. Just note that the comment period does close right now. It currently closes on the 16th of June. And as the Colonel mentioned, if the extension is complete, that would give us about 2 more weeks on top of that, get us till about the beginning of July, okay? All right, so with that said, that'll get us into the comment section. Now, after the comment section, if time allows, we are going to take any and all questions that you have until we have to leave the room. Our hard stop tonight is at about 7:30. This clock on the wall is a little bit ahead, so we've got more than a half hour right now. So given the number of people that have signed up for public comment, we do have probably ample time to cover some questions as well. So if you have a question that you've jotted down or have been thinking about, We will do our best to get to you in the formal part of the meeting, and then also keep in mind, if you'd like to talk one-on-one with any of our persons here, we'll have some time while we're doing our tear down that you'd be able to come up and talk on a one-to-one basis if you'd like to do that instead. All right? Okay, with that said, I'm going to ask Peggy Salazar to come on up. And Peggy, if you'd like, we've got a couple of different microphone options. We can either have you hold a handheld mic, or you can come up and use my microphone right here.
Here's your mic.
Okay. And then I'm going to, at the same time, kind of be on the side, switch our slides over and get our timer up. Okay, so you can just hand that over to this talk right there. If you want to start.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I do wish we had more people here, but I think people give up after a while after having to attend so many meetings over and over and over. In any case, my name is Peggy Salazar. I represent the Southeast Environmental Task Force, as well as I am a resident of the community, lifelong resident, and concerned community member. A couple of things. First off, I find it interesting that they listen to us about the other sites, which kind of supports the fact that we were right, that those CDFs did not belong in any of those locations that they had first scouted out. So they basically supported our, I would say, what we contended. The other thing is, I find it interesting that the existing site that they said in the very beginning could not be used. They were very adamant they could not be used, and now they can use it. So how do we believe what they say if they tell us one thing and then turn around and say another? So I'm a little concerned about that. The other thing is with the EIS, what they're not talking about is that they promised that in 25 years the existing site would be turned over to the Park District. That meant that the people of Chicago would have additional park space, or at the very least, animal habitat. That's not happening. So you are, in a sense, denying the people of Chicago that public space. We are not giving the park space. You're now telling us that in 20 more years we'll have that space. Well, past practice says that this site that was supposed to operate for 25 years is now going into 40. So we expect that that could very well happen again. So that means 80 years is what we would have to wait for their park space. In addition, that's 80 years of dumping contaminants in our neighborhood. Almost a century of doing so. And that to me is a very archaic system. I know you said that it's too expensive to do any other treatment, any other way method, but since when is doing the right thing? What do we worry about cost for it? Cost should not be a factor in doing the right thing. We don't want it here, we don't want it in the neighborhood, we don't think it belongs. We think filling in the lake was a mistake in the beginning. Why are we going to perpetuate that mistake? Why are we going to continue the process? So we're very concerned. SETF still takes the stance. It's the wrong place, it's the wrong way, it's the wrong method. Find something else, do it right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next one is Jim Kinney. Jim, here, I will bring a microphone over here. If you can, you wouldn't mind using this? I think it'd be a little bit easier. Here, here. That way you can.
Oh, okay. My concern is there was no mention of the lake being 2 foot higher. With global warming, it's supposed to go up another 6 inches. That's going to be a factor, I think. I get it that you need to dredge the river, but this is our drinking water, and this is pretty important. And if we're taking all the precautions in the world to keep these contaminants out of the lake, it shouldn't be near the lake. So I think we should spend the money, the government should, and we should make a facility to go ahead and handle these contaminants. That's pretty much it.
All right, very good, thank you. Okay, that was the list that was signed in when we entered the meeting tonight. Has anybody, since you came into the meeting, decided you'd like to make a formal statement or a comment? If you'd like to raise your hand. Okay, seeing none? Oh, yes, yeah, go ahead, come on up. And because I don't have your name, if you could give us your full name and any affiliation if you'd like.
Sure, my name is Sandra Del Toro. I'm with Friends of the Parks. I'm actually a former resident of South Chicago as well. And I'm happy to hear that you're going to be including on your website the data that's been indicated that we've been asking for in terms of show us data. We've indicated several times that this is safe and this is operated safely, and we want to see, in the interest of transparency, that that is actually the case. But it is very concerning that this is still operating without a liner. And I know your EIS made reference several times that the natural clay bottom of the lake. But it was never meant to, this is a 1984, we're not really putting dredged materials in the water directly anymore. And it's a great concern for us that this is happening at a time when we're also, you know, at a time that that you've said repeatedly that this is not suitable for open water placement. And so, just in the interest of transparency, that's something that that interests us. And you know, I think, you know, to echo what's been said, we've been hearing, and you know, and that things have been dismissed because they're too cost prohibitive. That you pursue a least cost option, finding, you know, and taking into consideration other alternatives. And I think the residents of the southeast side deserve more than the least cost option. They deserve the best option. And I think that's something that we should do.
Very good, thank you. Okay, anyone else interested in making a formal comment or statement for us? Okay, seeing no hands. I'm going to say that the comment period has ended, and we will move then on into any questions that you have for us. Anything in particular that you'd like to ask, you've got the option of either coming up to this microphone at this podium, or if you think you can say it loud enough that I can hear, we can definitely try that as well. We've got a fairly small group here, so go ahead.
Hi, Alderman Garza. So my question is, you said that the sediment will be clean enough to use at sites by 2025? I'm sorry, it was a lot of information that was given over the past hour, but the sediment will be clean or is clean to use at others, that we could use it to fill?
Yes, it's clean enough for certain uses, and so things
Can you
like.
give me an example of what that would be?
Can we go back to this?
No, you don't have to go back to slide, please. not
Yeah,
this slide.
Jennifer, we have our most valuable player here on sediment that.
Hi, Jennifer Miller. I'm an environmental engineer with the Corps of Engineers. And my background is environmental engineering, which includes water treatment and water chemistry and sediment chemistry. So the harbor sediment is clean right now. So we can use it anytime that we want to. And in fact, we already started stockpiling stuff, but because, as it was pointed out, the lake is high, we haven't dredged in the harbor so much. We're actually planning on dredging in the river in the next year, but not in the harbor at this point. So it's already clean enough to be used. And clean is always a question, like what does clean mean? So clean for open water placement, and this is part of the confusion, it depends on what's in the water. And for the harbor material is fine-grained, it's like topsoily, and it contains ammonia. And you don't want that on your beach or in your water. It causes algae growth and so on. But upland, you want fine-grained stuff. That's our topsoil. And heck, people pay a lot of money for ammonia. They buy Miracle Grow and things like that. That's actually what plants need. So that material, it doesn't contain measurable amounts of PCBs. It contains low levels of metals. It doesn't contain oil and grease or those kind of industrial pollutants. So what we're modeling our beneficial use at is another project that was already completed, and you probably have heard of it. It was called Mud to Parks. So in that case, the people from Lake Peoria, they have a lot of dredge material, it's clean, it comes from the farm fields, it's got a lot of nutrients, ammonia and stuff. It's kind of topsoily because it's coming off their farm fields. And they used it for cover material.
So I think a really good example of that would be steelworkers.
Uses it can be. So like mud to parks or Illinois EPA worked with the transportation agencies in the past for fill reuse and defining what's clean fill, because in an urban area you have a lot of dubious quality material, right? So that's what we mean by it's clean material.
Okay, here, I'll see, I have another hand right behind first, please, and then we'll go to you next. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. You guys are all good? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay, how many CDFs are along Lake Michigan?
In the Great Lakes area, the Corps has around 45, I believe, total. Some of those are closed. That includes Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio. Ohio has a whole bunch because the Maumee River and the Cuyahoga River are really muddy. They're really muddy, let me say. And then it also includes New York and the states around Lake Ontario. They don't have very much lake area. So
the other question I got is, have you taken in climate change is going to be a problem in this area, right?
yeah, so
It's going to be a wetter area.
well, so actually, I think the data aren't very clear on that because most models show the long-term lake levels dropping over time, and that the area might have more rain, but it's going to be a periodicity. So you're going to have really big storms and then drought, and really big storms and then drought. And during the drought, you get a lot of evaporation, and so the lake levels drop. So we don't think it will affect the CDF.
You don't think?
Well, that's why we have our coastal engineer, who's actually not here tonight, look at that and look at the dikes. They're already much higher than, flood levels or anything. We already don't have a problem if waves come, the material doesn't wash out or anything. They're way above that level, and we're going to be building up. And so the plan includes, Mike doesn't show you the design, but it includes on the lakeside armoring the outside of that so that it won't wash it away.
How much higher is this CDF going to be now from where
So it's about 25 feet. There's two lifts of build 11 feet, build another 11 feet, and then put a couple foot cap on it. So the current, and that's going to be inside the dikes. So the dikes that are outside it the plan isn't to raise those, it's to build inside those further. So it'll be a smaller hill within those external dikes, and the current level of sediment in the CDF is almost up to ground level. So it'll be like from the Iroquois landing up.
So putting more material on top of the material that's there, this is just, I have no idea, but you're putting more pressure on what's there, right? Downward pressure?
Yeah,
Does that affect anything? Squeeze things out?
It won't squeeze things out because the outer side are huge rocks. So the sediment's not going to be heavier than those rocks. But you're right, the inside should settle, which is actually good because, you say we don't want to build another one in the future. I don't want to build any more of these in the future. Like the Corps really, really wants to get out of the sediment disposal business. We want only clean material to deal with. But if it settles, then maybe we don't have to build it as high, or we can fit more material in there and get that last little bit, so in the future we don't need another facility.
It sounds to me like there's a lot of maybes and this and that,
Well, I can't predict the future.
It isn't real hard science.
I can't predict the future of how clean the river will be. I can tell you that it's gotten much, much, much cleaner. And the harbor has too.
About the way the stuff is going to be handled, just sitting there, when it rains, too much rain, just all kinds of different factors. They could leach this stuff into our drinking water.
Well, yeah, the sediment itself, when it compacts, water doesn't go through it. It settles on the bottom and forms an impermeable layer. And so we drain any water that's with the sediment and any rain that falls onto it to the pond, and then we treat it and discharge it to the river, which flows away from the drinking water, because that was part of the whole, big Chicago drainage projects 100 years ago, right? So the river drains back downstate, so those people are gonna get anything. I mean, we treat the water, and IEPA says it meets the water quality standards for the river.
Okay.
The comments period is like, why are we putting more on this property that supposedly had only a 24, 25-year lifespan? We should be getting a park out of it, and you go to a different facility and we get another park. Sounds like we're gonna be chipped out of a park in
Well,
20 years.
So we couldn't find another site that everybody liked. I mean, let me say that. If there's another site that you like better than this one, please make that comment, because we had several sites that were really close.
Lincoln Yard.
No, it's the
So-
river.
Part of the reason that the current facility is still open is that we haven't been dredging the whole federal channel. We dredged just enough for the boats to get through, so that we were saving that capacity, so we don't have to keep building facilities. Because we don't want to keep building facilities. They're expensive, and that's not our primary mission. Our primary mission is to ensure the boats get through. Doing all this other stuff is a side effect of that. We have to do something responsible with the sediment.
Can I say something? One of the things that, all the sites that they told us, one of the things that really struck the group of people that worked with the Corps was that you had to put this stuff on a clean site. So we were gonna contaminate another site. And I think we have plenty of contaminated sites, we don't need another contaminated site. So to have another site dug and contaminated didn't make any sense. There was some contaminated sites that met the criteria, oh, they didn't meet the criteria and they couldn't put them there. So,
You can't recontaminate already contaminated sites?
no, you have to put the contaminated,
The
it has to.
contaminated stuff can't go on an already contaminated.
Well, it is, and Peggy's right. At first they said they couldn't, but now they are. They had to use a clean site to put it, and we pushed back on that. So
Okay.
I'm actually happy that you're putting it there instead of another place, because we don't need another landfill.
Okay, all right, very good. I had a hand over here.
Except
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I was looking at your board over here with the air quality, and it seems like the testing site was pretty far away from the actual site of this facility. I was wondering if you guys had more air quality data closer to the site, if you could share that or make that more clear, because it looks like the site for the actual testing is pretty far away, like miles away.
So let me clarify, I put that on the figure because people were interested in knowing where there's an air monitor. That air monitor is operated by the state, I believe. It's a state-funded air monitor, and that happens to be the closest one to the area. It's not an air monitor that we have. And we don't have an air monitor for this because the thing that's a problem from some sediment, like in Indiana Harbor, are the organic compounds, like the oil kind of compounds that volatilize, that go into the air. This material doesn't have those high concentrations of volatiles, it just has metals. So the only thing that would be an air pollutant is if we have dust, and if you can see the dust, it's a violation. So we work really hard to make sure that we don't have any dust clouds. And actually, from this facility, when we put the wet sediment in there, it grows weeds, and those weeds actually help keep the dust down.
Excuse me, point of honor, point of honor too, but point of personal privilege. I get stuck with bureaucrats in the city for having weeds 10 inches tall. I've got edibles and ornamentals, and if they don't know that the what's that plant? It's a butterflies use.
Sir, can I have you just hold that? We're gonna try to finish your question up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I understand that it may not contaminate, but I don't think it's that much to get the air quality tested and to share that just for the sake of doing it, and I don't think it could hurt. And the last thing is that you mentioned that the plan changed, but from the earlier things I've read, the original plan was to just vertically expand this facility. So I just wonder if you could further explain how exactly the plan changed.
So
it was
originally, okay.
Let's be careful that we didn't have a plan. We had alternatives.
So in 2015, we released a dredge report. We had identified Republic Steel site as a potential location for a new facility. And at the time, we did not have a sponsor, and we did need a sponsor that was capable of providing assurances on their requirements. And so we were not able to move forward with the plan. In 2017, we formed a partnership with the City of Chicago, and at that point in time, the Republic Steel site became unavailable. And so last year, we held a series of stakeholder meetings and talked about looking for additional sites because the site we had identified initially was no longer available. And so we did a series of meetings last year, and I think some of the photos in our slideshow we won't go back to showed the sites. We had a number of sites. We asked people to provide input on those sites, and at that time we were looking at needing a capacity of 1 million cubic yards. Based on the input we got from those stakeholder meetings, we took another hard look, as Mike said, on beneficial reuse of material, and because the harbor material is clean, we identified that we would remove 500,000 cubic yards of capacity from the facility. So we went from a facility that needed 1 million cubic yards of capacity to a facility that needed 500,000 cubic yards of capacity. That made vertical expansion of the CDF feasible. It was not feasible at 1 million cubic yards. The site was not large enough. And so that has been a change that came out of the input we got from the public, was take another hard look at beneficial use, re-look at the things that maybe were not feasible, because it is going to be very challenging to find a site that's going to be acceptable. And so that's kind of the process that we came to, and that is the transition that we went to from those meetings from 17, when we started on board with the city, through those meetings to today, is we've identified a smaller need for disposal capacity, and now we have a site that can manage that 500,000 cubic yards.
Okay. If you'd like more details on that, we will be here during our wrap-up. You can come and talk to us as well, okay? So I have a hand way over there, and then I've got one in the front corner next. So go ahead.
Okay, as if you don't have enough to worry about, have you noticed the Phragmite?
Yeah, so Phragmites is an invasive a grass species, and it spreads. It's very adaptable to urban areas, to any standing water, and it's spread throughout this region, throughout the Great Lakes region, and it's really forced out a lot of native habitat. And the Phragmites grows really, really densely, and it's terrible habitat for our native birds and animals. So it's really of concern because you're squeezing out the plants and animals that we want to have. So in our facility, we have a variety of plants that potentially grow, and we mow them. So, and this also gets to the gentleman who had the problem with the city calling his plants weeds. Well, we actually mow the CDF to keep those plants down. So we haven't had a problem with Phragmites. We don't want Phragmites in our facility because it would hinder our operation for placing sediment and grading it and so on.
Okay, can I share this? Right at 95th Street, where the park ends, if you're standing there and you look over the Homeland Security fence, there has been Phragmite in that corner. And it might be difficult for you to see it because of all the other sort of complicating things in the way. But it's there. It's actually it's growing up along the rocks near the Coast Guard also. And I'm not saying it started where you are and then it moved, because there's another place closer to the Calumet Yacht Club where it's been going for a number of years. So it's going to make it more difficult to even
the
kill it.
Phragmites it's a problem throughout the region, and it's grown in a lot of areas. The areas that you're talking about by the Coast Guard and by the end of the park, they're outside our areas to maintain.
Right,
but it is a general problem, I'll admit. And we've done our office also does ecosystem restoration, where they try and remove the Phragmites and get the native vegetation back in, because it is a big concern to everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I've got the front corner here, and then going here, just noting that the time now is 7:21. We've got about 9 minutes before we have to stop, so go ahead when you're ready.
So I have 3 questions. One is, there was somebody said about a green light. Who gives the green light? I heard a thing about there'll be a green light and then something happens. Who
So
gives the
there-
green light?
So there, what I was referring to, there's like two more. One is our ADM, which is an acronym for Agency Decision Milestone. And what it is when we get input from the public and we do a peer review,
Right.
and we do an agency review, and we've got it on, and we still think we have a viable plan based on all those reviews, then we present that to our higher headquarters, and they say, yes, we agree, you have a viable plan. Go ahead and do more detailed engineering and cost estimating. And then there's another milestone after that. Once we've done that, we finish the report with all of that added detail. We submit it, and it goes to our it goes for an approval where they say this plan is good, it's approved for construction and design and construction. So there's two more milestones. And there is one more public review that happens for that second milestone for when we're going for approval. There is one more public review that's associated with that.
Okay, and so one of the other things was about the funding. You said that the timeline could change depending upon funding. When you talk about funding, are you talking about the city? Is
So
our mayor aware?
it's actually-
Is Mayor Lightfoot aware of this?
Because it's cost shared, the city would have to be involved. Our next funding milestone, we actually have federal funds for design, so if this plan gets approved, we can start to design if the city is able to come up with a cost share for that design, and then the cost share for the construction. So really, I think Mr. Burt mentioned that, there's some uncertainty there about the funding, and so they still have to do their work to figure out the funding. We have some federal funds for design, we don't have federal funds for construction yet. So once that plan is approved, we still have to kind of wait and see what happens with funding for design from the city.
So is the mayor aware, our new mayor aware? Well.
I'm not in a position to speak on her behalf, but certainly the transition team is being briefed on all the outstanding issues.
Wow, that was really politically correct.
Okay, anything else?
One more question.
Okay.
Does anyone from our neighborhood work there? I mean, how many jobs does this provide?
Nobody.
How many people work in that facility, and are any of them from our neighborhood? 10 4.
That's a CDF?
At the CDL?
Yeah, at the CDF.
It's periodic, Tim, I don't know what.
There's about 3 or 4 people that work there routinely, had no.
That's it, 3 or 4 people? That's
That work
it?
there routinely, yes.
Very routinely.
We had a team member, we did live in this area, who unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, and had nothing to do, unfortunately, it was a construction accident.
Okay.
He was killed, but he did live in this area. And so now currently, our equipment operators do not live.
4 people work there, none from our area.
No.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I had a hand over here. Go ahead when you're ready.
I want to go back to the air quality testing question that we heard earlier. Was the possibility of placing a particulate matter monitor at the site considered as a method to mitigate potential?
We haven't considered it because this area, this sediment, is so much less polluted than what we use as kind of our benchmark, and that's Indiana Harbor, just across the straight line. There we have tons of air monitors. We do 2 types of monitoring. We do real-time monitoring for particulates and for naphthalene. Naphthalene is an industrial byproduct of the steelmaking process, and it causes cancer. And the sediment in Indiana Harbor has very high levels of naphthalene. So we monitor those 2 things, and we measure nothing except we measure particulates when they are putting new gravel on the dirt road around the facility. It's the only time that we've had any particulate problems. And then we also do what's called ambient monitoring, and this is the type of monitoring they do at the school that's indicated there, is they take a sample over a 24-hour period, and they do it, usually it's every 6 days is the standard frequency for the National Ambient Air Monitoring Program, and everybody works with US EPA has kind of rules on how they do that. And so we have monitors set up at our facility for measuring particulates, and we take those samples and we measure metals in them, and for measuring volatile organic compounds and semi-volatile organic compounds. Those are both petroleum compounds, naphthalene, benzene, things like that. We measure those at our facility and at the high school, which is located just pretty close to our facility.
But George Washington, is what you answered?
No, this is in East Chicago. And so we've never measured anything. And since this facility, the sediment is 1/10 to 1/100th as polluted. If we don't, our benchmark is if we don't have problems at Indiana Harbor, we don't think we have problems here because it's so much cleaner, frankly. So it's something that we could consider certainly in the future. I anticipate that the results are going to be really boring, frankly.
We like boring.
Yeah.
You don't live here, so.
Well,
All right, so let's go ahead then.
So, two questions. Would this fall under bulk handling material?
I don't know how bulk handling material is regulated. Sediment is regulated under the Clean Water Act normally, and I guess our lawyers can. I'll let the lawyer answer that question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really know what regulation you might be referring to.
Well, we're working really hard to try to pass some new bulk handling material, an ordinance with the Department of Health, to make sure that anybody that has bulk material has to provide air monitoring, has to adhere to certain restrictions as far as pile height and blah, 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 to keep the residents in this area safe. I'm just asking if this would fall under bulk material.
I'm not aware that it would fall within that criteria. We are, however, we comply with basically the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the various permitting and regulatory authorities that govern that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make one observation that this facility is different than, I know if you go like on the Skyway, you can see piles of stuff that are out on the docks, and that's what people get concerned about. But what's on the outside of ours are dikes that have grass or rocks, depending on where we are, and the sediment is down in below.
Right.
So it's less available to be blown around, and it's wet when we place it. And then when it dries out, it grows, grass and weeds and whatever.
Okay, folks, we're drawing to an end.